So in this segment, we're going to be talking about no economic benefits from Brexit so far, according to David Davies. Now, Davies was I think he was the first Brexit minister. He was the one that said we'll go to Berlin, not to Brussels, and then he's also famously had no notes when his counterpart Michel Barnier had a lot of notes and paperwork and things to reference. Barnier's notes were in his head or in his fantasy land. So, Brexit has failed to deliver any notable economic benefits more than 6 years after the vote to leave the EU, David Davies has admitted. The former Brexit secretary, a key figure in the push for withdrawal and negotiations that followed, blamed the pandemic for the absence of any gains from the upheaval. Now, I'm not sure if David Davies is arguing after 6 years there are no Brexit benefits because of COVID makes no sense, given that COVID only hit Europe in March of 2020, which was around 3 months after we properly left the EU. But we left outside the transition period in 2021, so it just seems really weird to argue the 6-year mark. With the government partying a lot through the lockdowns and denying COVID a lot of the time, how can you keep blaming COVID? Also, for the most part, I think the government could have dealt with COVID and tried to get some quote Brexit wins. I mean, you would think people like Davis would have planned out exactly which areas they wanted to deregulate and have that ready to go, right? So for him to argue about the 6-year mark makes no sense. That's not an argument I would push, especially if you're then blaming COVID. It makes no sense. Asked if, amid growing calls for a change of course, he accepted, "We haven't seen any economic benefit for having left the EU," Mr Davies replied. "No major ones. We have seen the damage, though, with the UK's exports dropping by around 15%, and that's total exports. With the UK being the only economy in the G7 to have negative growth since quarter 4 of 2019, we are the only ones who left the trading bloc we were in. For example, America still in NAFTA, Canada still also in NAFTA or the USMCA, whatever it's called. They haven't left the trading bloc they're in. If anyone argues, well, the USA didn't leave the EU, did they? So there's a reason why we are an outlier." He pointed to minor wins, such as the UK delivery of COVID vaccines before the rest of Europe, although it's strongly disputed. I mean, why journalists can't call a spade, I don't know. Our fast initial vaccine rollout was not down to Brexit. Even the UK's vaccine agency said so it's not disputed, it's just simply untrue. Davis went on, "There'll be more of that. We will see our medical-based industries and our software-based industries grow significantly." I mean, what does that mean? Where are these companies and what are they going to do to help them? What are the government going to do? Also, the more deregulation that happens, how are you going to export these medicines to the EU? With software-based stuff, how are you going to export these services without a deal around specifically services? And what's to stop these startups moving to the EU after a bit because they'll have more consumers and a more skilled workforce? Davies, now a backbencher, which I'm surprised he's still there, I'll be honest, also echoed Rishi Sunak in insisting the head of the CBI, Tony Danker, is wrong to believe looser immigration rules would help rescue the economy. The situation is that, according to the government's own figures, there are more vacancies than people in the UK, or unemployed people in the UK. So how are you going to fill these jobs? I get some Tories work 2 jobs, but I don't think that will help fill the crisis we're in right now. The comments come amid evidence of disagreement at the top of the government about how to mitigate the forecast 4% hit to GDP with a 15% loss of trade from Boris Johnson's hard Brexit deal. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, argued last week that the vast majority of cross-channel trade barriers can be removed without explaining how. It's clear that Hunt knows we need to improve trading relationships with the EU. The problem is some of these Tories think we'll get a better deal based on the fact that by removing trade barriers it helps businesses on both sides, the EU side and the UK side. But without closer alignment to the EU in this scenario, it would risk having substandard goods going into the single market. Also, given that there are exporters, given that their exporters, the EU exporters, are not struggling as much as the UK ones because of multiple reasons, but also the EU border checks are more stringent than the UK's, such a setup would benefit the UK way more than the EU, so that idea also makes no sense. The CBI has pointed to a lack of workers as a key reason for its warning that last week's autumn statement, while reversing Truss's blunders, had no plan for growth. Sarah Olney, the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson, said people will be aghast that while living standards plummet, Conservative MPs are yet again fighting amongst themselves over Europe. Their pointless red tape is strangling trade and with our closest neighbours. She's right. This is Tory infighting, fighting with themselves again, and them trying to run away from a potential rival in Reform UK. But unless the Tories figure things out, the UK will continue to struggle way behind the other G7 members. And what Tony Danker says up here is true that Sunak has reversed a lot of the issues in the Kwasi Kwarteng Liz Truss mini budget, but there's no plan outside of that. You reverse the mistake, but what do you do then? Where's your success? And all they've given us is austerity 2.0. So David Cameron and George Osborne all over again. That economic policy failed back in 2010, and it's going to fail again. The only difference is more people might die this time round because there's less to cut. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.